Good afternoon, everyone. Today is February 4th, 2024. Let's fast forward to 2025. It's 3 p.m. This is a City of Prescott special meeting that we set up a couple of weeks ago. So we'll talk about the one item on the agenda, but we'll start with the roll call, please.
Mayor Good.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Cantelmi.
Here.
Councilwoman Fruworth.
Here.
Councilman Gambogi.
I am here.
Councilman Montoya.
Still here?
Councilman Moore.
Here.
And Councilmember Rusing.
Here.
All are present.
City Clerk, will you read the agenda item description, please?
Discussion, consideration, and possible action regarding adoption of ordinance number 2025-1883, an ordinance of the Mayor and Council of the City of Prescott, Yavapai County, Arizona, placing on the August 5th, 2025 election ballot the question of amending the Prescott City Charter for purposes of protecting city-owned open space in perpetuity, and adoption of resolution number 2025-1914 related to a citizen petition received by the Council at the November 19th, 2024 voting meeting and submitted by Bonnie McMinn and Rod Moyer.
All right, we'll start this off with a presentation from staff, and then I'm going to allow the petitioners an extended period of minutes to discuss their petition, and then we'll take public comment. So I guess that's you, City Attorney.
All right, that's me. So just starting where we left off, we had received a petition from Bonnie McMinn and Rod Moyer on an open space charter amendment to send some language to the voters to approve protections for open space. One of the concerns at the time was that the petition did not list what uses were allowed and what uses were not allowed. And so it had two general purposes. One was to prevent the city from selling or otherwise transferring open space to anyone else, developers especially, or their other third parties, and to limit the uses on those city properties. So it did the first one really well, but didn't really get into or limit the uses that were allowed on that property. So we wanted to be clear about what uses were allowed and what uses were not allowed. So, and the first thing, and the reason why it didn't really restrict uses is government uses are exempt from zoning. As both the general rule of law and specifically within our land development code, government uses are exempt. So to restrict uses, we have to say exactly what uses are allowed or restricted within the document itself. So we met a few times with the petitioners and worked out a document that I think corrected those issues and is in a decent spot. Specifically, as you can see there and you have in your packets, the only uses that would be allowed are utilities, nature preserves, utility installation services, flagpoles, gazebos, visitor centers, bathroom facilities, trailheads, and city-sanctioned trails, and ancillary uses, along with some road uses, but not thoroughfares or primary roads. So that, I think, fixed a lot of the issues and put in a decent spot. But the issue still remained that the open space wasn't necessarily defined, and we didn't know exactly what it would apply to. And it also had a provision where future acquired properties would be protected in perpetuity as open space. And it just kind of presented problems where a future council may choose not to acquire land that they otherwise could because they weren't certain about the protections and how the automatic open space designation would apply. So we also did another draft, and it's a staff recommended version, which maintains the protections against sale, lease, or transfer in the same way that the original one did, and it prohibits uses inconsistent with open space. It's the same allowed uses. But it applies to specific designated parcels as opposed to kind of a general automatic application. And then parcels can be added. It now sets up a structure where parcels can be added over time as new parcels arise or are acquired. So the major difference, by far the major difference, is the definition of city-owned open space. Whereas in the petitioner's version, the definition of city-owned open space was anything that's currently zoned NOS or anything on the general plan's land use map. The new definition just has the specific parcels so we can identify what we're looking at and what you're voting on. So there's a few minor differences as well. It allows for a continuation of pre-existing uses. So if, for example, there's a park with a playground on it that it currently exists and becomes protected as open space, that playground can stay. But playgrounds otherwise are not a permitted use under our document. So those current uses that are currently in existence can stay in perpetuity. It also allows for examples where we have a currently existing contract or document, maybe a lease or an IGA, that would not be prohibited. So where existing law or existing contract says we can't prohibit a sale for some reason, we won't be in trouble that we have a charter provision contrary to law or to our contract. I can't think of anything off the top of my head except for maybe the Community Nature Center that has an IGA with PUSD, but there might be other leases or development agreements that could potentially be implicated as well. And then in the other minor change, though, we'll talk about whether you want this in there, is that it allows for leases to providers of one of the approved uses. So if approved uses being the use of a trail, it might allow for an outfitter or something like that. And I'll just kind of cut to the chase. The petitioners don't want us to put that provision in. So this is the recommended version, and you have it. The big question becomes, are the uses what you want in this document, and are the properties? And I know you can't read that, so we'll get to the specific properties in a second. So these are the properties in the document itself currently. We call it protected properties because these ones are covered in the document. This was identified by several staff members who sat down and said, okay, these are open space, these should stay open space, and so we put it into the document. And then we have a list of, and I'll get into the list in a second, of other properties that could potentially be brought in. And so this is what I'm asking you as council. Do you want to bring these other documents in? And I've divided those into two categories based on staff input. And I guess first of all, under that list that I just showed you, the protected list, there's 2,208 acres. And that, in addition to the 1,034 acres that are currently protected in Acker Park, Willow Lake, and Watson Lake, you have, 3,242. So it protects a lot more than the amount of land purchased under open space tax funds. But I don't think that's the only question, whether the open space tax fund purchase is the driver. So here are the additional potential properties, and this is the one that I mentioned staff doesn't have a whole lot of concerns about. And so this Little Thumb Butte, Little Thumb Butte is actually 4 parcels. And I know it has other names. We've called it Little Thumb Butte. I think there's Reserve or something. There's other names, but Little Thumb Butte is 4 parcels. This is the largest one, and staff doesn't have major concerns about adding that. Centennial Westridge, we brought in several of these parcels. As you can see, I put the acreage on just for your information, but they're fairly small. But added up, they add to about 15 acres. And then you can see the other parcels on there that staff has said, these ones we don't have much concern with. And then here are some of the most important parcels that we've discussed. And so this will be up to council to consider. And staff is here to answer why there's kind of lingering concerns. But I'll tell you primarily because, for example, Community Nature Center and Goldwater Lake, it's not that it shouldn't be protected. And I think the provisions prohibiting sale and so forth are very important. And you can add it to the document as you see fit. But the problem is they're used recreationally. And recreational is not an allowed use under the document. So we could add uses, recreational uses, or it can just continue on as it currently is because of the language we put into that second document saying uses can continue, current uses can continue. But that kind of current uses can continue is doing a lot of heavy lifting in this document at this point. So I'll finish up first, but staff will be available to talk about these parcels, why this one is on, why these parcels are on this list that may require additional consideration. So as I mentioned, there's 2 issues for council discussion. I guess one is whether you want this at all, but there seemed to be general support for this ballot proposition. So then the 2 questions are which properties to protect, all of one list or add the other 2 lists as well, and which uses to allow. These are some additional uses that have been requested. So I put it up for your consideration. It's not in the document, but they've been requested. Recreation space, park and park amenities, amphitheaters and arenas, campgrounds, public safety, substations, stables. Those were ones that were brought up as maybe uses that would be consistent with open space. But as I mentioned, they're not in the document. You'd have to make that part of your motion. And a few other additional requested changes that I need to address. The first, as I mentioned, there's a provision in the current document that allows for leases to providers of one of the approved uses. And specifically, the petitioners asked that we remove that provision. There's also been a change that we change all existing city-owned open space property, which is the language currently in the document, to the city-owned open space property as defined below. City-owned open space is defined in the document itself, so the first version is legally accurate, but it may not be as clear to people voting on it as the second version. And then we got a request from Prescott Creeks, who holds a lease at Watson Woods, and may want to enter into an easement. And these were the second two requests are requests that they made, and that is that we add to the following uses, the approved uses: mitigation banking, in lieu fee mitigation, conservation banking, and that we change the parenthetical following the prohibition on leases to say, except for the purposes of managing open space. So those two changes were requested by Prescott Creeks, and I think there's a discussion to be had on Watson Woods specifically. It's very important to the city, and I think it's important to open space, but the parcels themselves are much bigger than just the Watson Woods area. They include a lot of public works infrastructure, for example. And they're also subject to this lease with Prescott Creeks and possibly a conservation easement. So whether to, as we have in the document itself, the Watson Woods provision is, portions of those parcels. And this is also sometimes referred to as the P-vine parcels. So we'd have to redraft those parcels to exclude the public works infrastructure where they have offices and other uses, and I think the transfer station as well. So that portion is somewhat problematic, and you could remove that from the document. It would solve those issues, but otherwise we're just going to have to redraft the just legal descriptions and make sure the open space parcels are part of the vote. And with the consideration of the request from Prescott Creeks for those two changes. Sorry, I'm going backwards. So that's the entirety of the presentation. I think that the documents themselves, there's two versions which I think have both been brought into an acceptable position. I think version 2, the recommended version, is better because it eliminates a lot of the unknowns, that we specifically state which properties are protected and which are not. But I think, as I have on the slide, the discussion today, I think in large part has to be which properties go on, whether all of those additional properties are not, and whether the uses as we have them in the document are appropriate, or to add or remove uses as well. So as I mentioned, staff's here to answer questions about why those properties are on the may need more research, and any other questions you may have.
All right, we'll start off by having questions or comments from council. Councilman Moore.
Thank you, Mayor. Joe, can you share with us, and I'm going to have a follow-up question to this question, who requested additional uses? That last slide that had different uses? Yeah, thank you, right there.
Yeah. As we met with all the council members in ones or twos, and these were some of the requests that I heard back. So just through different council members, but council obviously decides as a group, so that's why I didn't put it into the document. But
sure. The reason I'm raising that question is we currently have, like Watson Lake, it has campgrounds, and it also has an outfitter. You can rent kayaks and canoes. And I don't think anybody has a problem with that. I think people appreciate the fact that they can camp in town and that they can rent a kayak when they go to the lake, especially out-of-town guests who maybe don't bring a kayak, and they come up here and say, oh my gosh, let's go get a kayak, and they love it. And so I think as a public, we need to think bigger about our open space and not be so restrictive. in defining what possible uses can occur in open space, because those activities are currently occurring in open space, and we value that and we enjoy that. So that's just a comment that I wanted to make.
And I will tell you, with the amount of property we're talking about, which is 2,200 acres on the kind of approved list already, and then an additional, 1,000 acres, something along those lines. There's a lot of different parcels, and it's hard to have a one-size-fits-all solution. So there's not going to be a perfect document, quite frankly.
I agree.
You're going to decide on what side to err on.
Right, and with our future looking ahead to a Granite Dells Regional Park, we know it's going to have amenities. And we don't know maybe yet what those amenities are going to be, but we know that we're going to want amenities in what potentially could be a state park. And so we need to be thinking ahead, that we need to have a bigger vision.
I think that the question on recreation is a big one for council. And it's especially big when you consider some of the parcels that we don't have, that kind of staff has a little bit of concern about, because they're recreational. What are Goldwater Lake and Community Nature Center? Those are the two I have in mind. I mean, for those who've been to the Community Nature Center, it has buildings, it has outdoor classrooms, kind of active recreational features. And so does Goldwater Lake. And there has been discussions. I don't know if this is something, we're far from doing it, but there's been discussions about maybe one day having a campground or a place to camp at Goldwater Lake. So it's the question of whether to kind of foreclose that or not. And again, this is within council's prerogative and discussions.
Councilman Montoya.
Thank you, Mayor. Joe, kind of along those lines, I had a question. You mentioned leasing and the language around leasing. And I know I've had a meeting, and I think other members of council have had meetings as well with the executive director at the Highland Center, talking about potential uses at Storm Ranch, and similar to what the Highland Center does up at the National Forest land. And it would seem like that is a lease situation. And I guess my question is, are we boxing ourselves out of that, or do you feel comfortable that there's enough kind of component, enough leeway in the language to allow for that kind of usage?
I think Joe Baines will need to help me on this, but I believe that the parcel that the Seavers house is on is not part of these lists. It's a little section cut out because they have a life estate. And so that's where the lease would be, and then in that case, it would be allowed. If it's not, then yes, the answer is yes, it would be cut off.
But kind of going back to the previous, like if there was additional like amphitheaters that were used there, or outdoor classroom things like that existed even outside of that parcel, that specific little parcel. Because I've been out there and toured it, and I mean, depending on how big that parcel is, I don't know, Joe, maybe you can speak to how big that parcel is.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Councilman Montoya, it's about a little over 7 acres that we cut out for that life estate, and that is the area where the existing house, guest house, and the corrals are right now. And so, to your point, who knows what that looks like in the future? Could there be a partnership which would involve a lease with somebody like the Highland Center? Could it be riding stables? I mean, a lot of the things that we just can't tell you right now what they might be, but it does could potentially preclude us without expanded uses.
Thank you, Joe. One additional question for the city attorney, I guess, is the Watson Woods. Do you feel comfortable with the language that it's not going to impact the future of the potential conservation easements around there?
Because Prescott Creeks is the one that is seeking that conservation easement and has the lease, I think we'd rely on their input. And I have that slide that has their 2 pieces of input. I think it puts us in a position where the city offering the conservation easement is allowable, and we could do that. But us offering that as an option is different from it also meeting their needs.
I appreciate that. I guess I'm wondering if there aren't other things like that we haven't looked at yet. And I'm not, that's a hard question to answer, obviously, because you don't know what you don't know. But I guess we have a lot of open space, and trying to rally all the forces of the manpower of the city to do this in this timeline. I'm just concerned that, is there a sense that we've kind of turned over every rock? Maybe Joe Baines, you can speak to that.
Well, I'll say this, that, typically this would be something that would come from the city manager to staff to investigate thoroughly. These properties take a lot of investigative research. It takes a lot of time. I don't feel like we've had enough time to really do proper due diligence. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Councilmember Roosing.
Thank you. As it stands today, 4 council members with a simple majority vote could sell open space. We could sell Goldwater Lake. We could sell the Heart of the Dells. And today, with a simple majority vote of 4 votes, we could save all of our iconic open space and recreational property and bring it to the ballot and let the voters decide whether or not something should be sold or not. That's our purpose today, and that's, as far as I'm concerned, we just need to hash out what we want to save. And a lot of staff concerns, I understand, but we can grandfather infrastructure that's already in there, water tanks that are already there. They fall under utilities. So I think that we've got a list here. I'd like to see as comprehensive of a list as we can get and get this on the ballot and let the voters decide. This has been a dream of the city citizens for years. It's been in previous general plans, protecting open space in the charter. So we have a job to do, and I think we should put on our work boots and let's get this done and work together, because everyone agrees we need to protect it. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Ken Talmy.
Thank you. I guess this question is for both of you. One of the things I've been concerned about is not defining further recreation. And, part of the reason is, how do we outlaw something like off-road vehicles? We've had several of these rental places pop up. They rent, ATVs or whatever they call them today, side-by-sides, and they destroy the desert and everything else. How do we stop that? Because that really could be under the definition of recreation. And Joe, I've heard you talk about a light touch on the land for many years now. I don't consider that a light touch on the land. Is there a way of defining recreation for our purposes as maybe passive recreation, something that doesn't include a recreation type like that?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I think Joe answered that question too, but in code, motorized is not allowed on our trail system. So we have no motorized traffic is allowed on the trail system, which would include the open space. So that's something we've already prohibited.
Then one last question. Under these additional requested uses, again, thinking about campgrounds, how do we limit that? I have no problem with a campground, but I also don't think it's something that I'd like to see on every one of our open spaces. Is there a way to limit that?
I think that if we're looking at a parcel by parcel decision, we're looking at a whole different document. But it's either an approved use or not approved use where we go to the voters to ask for a campground.
And are you okay, Joe, with your department with these additional uses to be added?
I think that really it makes it a lot easier for us we're less worried about unintended consequences. I'll give you an example. Joe brought up Goldwater Lake. We don't have any camping there right now. So the way it's written, existing uses would be okay. But if we decided that and it would be a capital project that would come back anyway to the elected officials. But if we wanted to add it later, and these were in the charter, we wouldn't be able to do that. It would be my understanding. So that's what we're trying to do. I don't think anybody disagrees that this is a good idea. We just want to make sure that what we do doesn't have unintended consequences for future councils. That's the big question.
Thank you.
Councilman Moore?
Joe, just a simple question. You said no motorized use on trails. Does that include e-bikes?
That's a great question. Nobody's really weighed in on that. We've actually been kind of hoping that the federal government would weigh in on that, and they have it forest by forest, but not ours. So at this point in time, we're looking at it like the Class 1 and the Class 2 are non-motorized. Class 3 is throttled and is motorized. There's way more work to be done on that.
Thank you. I just think that's something that the city should probably make their own decision and not wait for the federal government to make that decision, since it is city-owned property and city trails.
And we are working right now on a possible request for proposals for a bike vendor, and that'll be a big question. And that again will come back to the elected officials for a discussion when we talk about that.
Yeah, for me, I think that's an example of how unintended consequences may occur. I mean, 5 or 10 years ago, nobody ever heard of e-bikes. But now a lot of people are very interested in using and acquiring them. So that's one of the things I think is difficult here, because I think a large percentage of the population would like to see these open spaces protected. But when you analyze the restrictions, both now and in the future, what can and can't be done, a lot of people like to be able to enjoy those open spaces. And that's just not just looking at them or walking on them or hiking on them or maybe having a trail ride on a horse. There's so many different ways of defining recreation and how we can enjoy our open spaces, not only protecting them, but enjoying them. And I think as we dig into the details here, we're seeing that this proposal becomes more and more complicated. And I'm trying to visualize or think through how we could put a ballot measure together with language that the voter who's not here in the room and has not spent a lot of time looking at this would be able to understand. I mean, if we restrict Goldwater Lake to only current recreational uses, that we can't put in another children's playground set. We can't develop Lower Goldwater Lake at all. And as we continue to grow as a community, there may be more interest in having those additional recreational amenities. So in many cases, they would be restricted by this charter amendment. And for people to say, well, if it turns out that we made a mistake here and we need to fix it, having another charter amendment be crafted, go back on the ballot, have to publicize it, explain it to the voters, and then be voted on to amend the previous charter amendment. I mean, you go back to the city charter, I think it's been amended about, a dozen times over the last 50, 60 years, something like that. So it takes time, effort, and if we turn out to find out that there's a big problem, it takes a long time to fix it. So I think that's the difference between what sounds like a good idea and what the actual complexities occur when you try to draft language that applies to all these different open space parcels. So that's just my general take on it. I would like to see the voters be able to make the decision ultimately, but in a way that is understandable. Because, even 478 took a lot of explaining to the community to understand what 478 meant. And we even had to amend the language to clarify some what we thought were simple definitions, but apparently were not. So that's an example of the kind of work and effort that goes into public votes on issues, and to amend the charter to include this looks to me like it's going to be difficult to do in an understandable way. So with that said, we'll offer the petitioners to come up and make a presentation right after Councilmember Rusing and Councilman Gambogi has a chance to comment on it.
Thank you.
I thought we were done with council comments, but apparently I was wrong. So,
Thank you.
Councilmember Rusing, please proceed.
We have to remember the reason why we're here today is to protect this property from being sold and to put that question into the hands of the voter. The fine points of uses and what can be put it there, that can be done through zoning changes, ordinances, resolutions. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, it's a little bit different, but if you just took, for example, the first paragraph of the document, you would have a prohibition on selling or otherwise transferring the property, and that would be in place forever. It would still allow for any government use, and then you could, over time, decide what government uses were appropriate.
Yeah. So
that's one option.
If there was a problem, we could go ahead and pass this and say next year, if there's, we want to do something, then we could just change the zoning. We could do an ordinance. We could do a resolution. That's exactly what we did with Prop 478. And that was already on the ballot and people had questions. So there is a way to do it. We just have to remember that our mission today is, do we want 4 council members to make a decision to sell like Goldwater Lake? Because in the past, that happened with Hacienda Lake. And there was a lawsuit over it, but unfortunately they lost because it was done under emergency provision, and that overrides a referendum by the citizens. So we've had that happen before, and we should listen to the voters, protect our open space, and if there is a problem later on that comes up, we can take care of it in other means legally.
Councilman Gambogi.
With all due respect to people's time, I would like to make a comment, but after the residents have an opportunity. So may I defer my comment to the second half?
Sure, you can. Councilman Montoya.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have a question before the petitioners come up. Joe and Joe, or Joe squared, if you will, can you speak to, I know that there's been a little bit of an all hands on deck around this process. I'm curious if you could kind of look forward or backward, depending on how you want to think of it. How much time do you think we could really dive into this and come back with maybe a better suited, like that where we can kind of guard against what the mayor was talking about with unintended consequences? How much time would that require, do you think?
I'll give a somewhat non-answer. And it depends on what council wants. If council wanted to just have a prohibition on transferring or selling the property, that's easy. We could come back and I could go do it in 10 minutes and come back to you with that. But if we want to have kind of a comprehensive solution with this property has this use and this property has this use, then we're talking probably weeks or months.
Thank you.
Very well. Now we'll listen to the petitioners. Mr. Moyer or Ms. McMinn?
Thank you, Mayor and Council, and thank you for calling this special voting meeting to continue what we were discussing on the 14th of January. I think, and this is not intended as sarcasm at all, I really appreciate that Joe stole some of my thunder here. So I may have to bunt on a few issues to avoid repeating him. But after the meeting on the 14th, Bonnie and I, the petitioners, heard concerns from council and staff about what we're calling today unintended consequences, doubts about whether they'd be able to do this or that on open space. And And of course, I wasn't a lawyer. I tried to argue that they, of course, could build an all-weather access, ingress, egress road for emergency purposes or whatever. But after that meeting, Bonnie and I reached out right away to Joe Young, and we asked if he could help us put together some language that would allay these concerns. And he did, graciously met with us, what was it, 3 times or 4, Joe? It's a blur. So we did come up with that language limiting the uses of open space to what we thought the council and staff could live with, and maybe they can't in some cases. But that language is now in both versions that have been presented in today's packets. And then the next thing we learned was that in the staff version of today's 2 proposals, Joe had inserted language that would permit uses to continue that were pre-existing. And that might answer some of the questions on parcels that are on that 3rd list he presented, of parcels that staff might still have concern about. Just as one example, I heard that one of the parcels on Little Thumb Butte was a worry because there's a water tank on it. Well, that's a pre-existing use, no more problem. So we also agreed a couple of meetings back with Joe that in principle we were okay with narrowing this to a list, a specific list of properties. What we didn't anticipate was the cut that was that we came back with in the staff version from 25 properties that Joe Baines had mapped out early last year to 16. So Joe has helped in putting together a list of properties that he thinks staff is comfortable with, in addition to the ones that are in the list today. And he's come up with a 3rd list of those that maybe could be put back in if concerns are answered. And my example was Little Thumb Butte. All 4 parcels, if that's the right number, would be okay there because the water tank is a pre-existing use. So we, in that same language that's now in both versions, we were opposed to some of the more active, less than passive recreation activities, such as an amphitheater. An amphitheater, really? In open space? Why not in a park somewhere? An arena. We've got an arena in the rodeo grounds. I mean, is that what we mean by an arena? Stables. I think if horses are permitted on our trails, a lot of hikers and bikers don't like them, but they're there. And they're horses that our residents here generally own. I'm not real happy about the idea of a stable there that would rent out a horse to any visitor who thinks he knows how to ride a horse. So public safety substation, yeah, under both of these versions, I think that would probably agree to, have to go to a vote of the public. But I can't imagine the public turning down a police substation, for example, or a new fire station. It doesn't take that much of our open space. So I hope, in closing, I hope that you will consider adding back into the list as many of those properties as possible. The lease language that we talked about, I can envision, and I think Bonnie and I gave Joe some of these scenarios. I can envision some horror stories that could arise out of that. Again, a big commercial operation where a visitor's center becomes nothing more than a big gift shop. So we'd have to be very careful with that. I think that's all I had to say other than what Joe already said for me, and I do thank you, Joe, for that. And I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Councilmember Rusing, did you have a question for Mr. Moyer?
Yes, I have a question. I see on this handout that you just gave us, you include Peavine Trail, and thank you for including it because it wasn't included in any versions by the city. And the reason why we need to include Peavine Trail, as you know, originally it was a rail. Now it's rails to trails. Originally it had a narrow gauge train that ran through the Dells, Iron King, Peavine, and now it's a trail. But I have spoken in the past to people from Prescott Valley that work in the town of Prescott Valley, and their vision is rails to trails, back to rails. They would love to see a train going back through the Dells. I'm serious. I've spoken to this person. And if that's the case, we need to include Peavine and then let the voters decide if we're going to sell it to become another, rail. Yeah, Disneyland. Okay?
Yeah. Yeah, Prescott Valley was trying to do the same thing with some of the Glassford Hill property that was their part of the IGA purpose. And they wanted a stair lift or a chair lift or something up the hill. This is not passive recreation, folks. This is Disneyland, like Councilman Rusing said. So yeah, I would absolutely want to see the Peavine included in that. And that, incidentally, has been the city's property since long before the property we got from the AED annexation deal. Any other questions? Thanks.
Bonnie McMinn?
Mayor, if I may, I would like to speak last after the citizens have participated.
Well, that's not how this meeting was set up. So you can either take your 10 minutes now or not.
Well, I'm only going to speak for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. I timed it.
Okay.
So does that mean I get another, 4 minutes and 40 seconds? I'm doing the math in my head. Anyway, if we may rebut, but I'm very thrilled with the people who are here with us today. Thank you, Mayor and Council, Bonnie McMinn, for the opportunity to work through your questions and concerns from the last meeting. I echo Rod's comments about the extensive collaboration that we did with Joe Young. I do want to address a couple of comments first. I think, so maybe I will be more than 4 minutes and 20 seconds. But the couple of comments, I think, first of all, there's all this discussion about unintended consequences. And that is true. And last time, I think my crystal ball was working and, somebody didn't have batteries in theirs. But the point of fact with what we have here today is the opportunity to take it to the voters. Now, we don't want to take one little thing that we're talking about, but let's talk about recreation. We have camping at Watson Lake, right? We have the concession stand with the outfitter. We have camping. There's camping in other parks. Camping is something that should be done in a park. If it's something that we want to look at, we can certainly do that. And I think it's a bigger issue because I don't think that our Parks and Rec department is ready for camping of any kind other than what we're already doing. And I can't speak to how many camping sites we have. But the pre-existing clause that Mr. Young put forth for us, I think handles a lot of it. And then it's a matter of discussion because this is something that is more than just, we're going to allow camping and people set up a tent. There's a lot of other things that would happen. And I would hope that we would also have permits and, all that type of infrastructure. But at any rate, I'm going to take a drink of water because I was not planning on speaking right now. I'll bring this over. At any rate, I don't want to belabor history too much. You've heard a little bit about history already, and many of us have been here for a while. But we had a deal. Yep, back in 2000, tax us for open space. It worked. The city collected tax dollars, and the purchases began with Little Thumb Butte. The 2003 general plan included the language, initiate a charter amendment to protect in perpetuity city-owned open space. We voted for it. We voted for something similar in 2015, and now the draft version of 2025 has the same provision. This is what the citizens want. We want our open space protected via charter amendment, and regardless of a location inside or outside the city boundaries. The list in the map I just handed out on Rod's behalf demonstrates our concerns about the city's original list and the omissions. Little Thumb Butte, gone, most of it. 3 out of 4 parcels gone. Community Center, gone. Portions of Granite Gardens, gone. Green property, gone. Portions of AED property, gone. Goldwater Lake, gone. This is critical for us. These properties are critical, and they need to be added to the city's list that council hopefully will approve today. Mr. Young's provided the additional list potential, and we respectfully request that these properties be added. People come here for our natural environment. It's an economic engine for our community. We've heard it before, but it's worth repeating. Thanks to the community survey, we have numbers to document it. 91% priority ranking. It ranked higher than police and fire. You asked, and we told you what was important to us, the citizens of Prescott. The voters just approved Prop 478. You asked, and we gave. In perpetuity, we trust the council and staff to do the right thing with our tax dollars and to do the right thing when we ask. When you ask us what we value and we tell you, we are hoping that it is a reciprocal arrangement. At first blush, the proposals look very similar. And the reality is that our proposal is the basis for the city proposal, and that is the proposal as Rod described. That's the proposal that we're talking about today, thanks to Mr. Young and the changes that he had made. I thought I was going last, so I was going to say, you've heard from people. I will speak for the people behind me, some anyway. Frustration, distrust, and fear because of the history surrounding this issue and the contemplation of the next steps if we are not successful here today. The people here today in the community share the common goal. We want city-owned open space protected in perpetuity, and if in the future something changes, like additional recreation opportunities, this amendment directs the city to take it to the voters during a regular election year. It's very clear and it's very simple. I don't think next week we're going to say we want to put camping on Goldwater Lake. I mean, it takes more than let's do it. So, I think that before I walked in here today, I thought we were on the cusp of a deal. Mr. Young gave us a better version, and yours is the hybrid of ours. We request that council approve the additional potential properties identified by city staff. We request that the leasing phrase, and Rod, if you want to be my Vanna White today, this is one of the concerns that we have with respect to the leasing language as it stands, because kiosks, any concessions can be put there. He's passing out a rendering of potential pink Jeep tours. That could happen. We've all seen it. If we've been to Sedona, we know what that feels like. It doesn't feel like you're in open space when the Jeeps are roaring by you and kicking up the dust or the rocks. So we don't like that as written because we should not engineer to a hypothetical exception. And if we do have exceptions, let's talk about those and look at, city staff plans things years in advance. When is the campground coming to Goldwater Lake is one of my questions. We explained that it insinuates private concession stands, the pink Jeep tour, as you can see. There's a compelling reason to do it in the future. Take it to the voters. If it becomes a revenue-generating situation, we can take it to the voters. The additional uses offered, although allowed through the land use code, are more appropriate in city parks. So maybe we do have a portion that Goldwater Lake becomes a campground. It is a recreational use, and it is grandfathered in, as we talked. We hope that you agree. This council has demonstrated time and again to possess the courage and the tenacity to make tough decisions, maybe even unpopular ones. We see determination and we see steeliness under pressure. This project is your legacy, all of you, and it will be a legacy for the folks that are going to be speaking after me. Mayor and members of council, you gave us, the petitioners, the legal and city staff, the directive to come back with language that you can accept, approve, and place on the August ballot. I believe that we have compromised and done that thanks to Joe Young and staff. We ask that you approve the city's version today with the additional properties as discussed. We would like the opportunity to revisit the finalized list with any additional properties presented today. We've heard from Prescott Creeks. I think that Joe Young has accommodated some of that. I believe that Michael Bird will be speaking later. But we would like the city to consider their concerns as well. Please finish what your citizens started almost 25 years ago and let the voters decide. If these things occur, we have a deal. We all want our city open space preserved and protected. It's what we deserve, and it's what we paid for. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McMinn. So we'll take public comment now.
Okay, we have 14 comment cards. As a reminder, public comment is limited 3 minutes. And I know that a couple of you did say you may not want to, so if I call your name and you don't want to come up anymore, just kind of wave at me and I'll move on to the next one. So our first card is from Jim Gehring.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Jim Gehring. I live in the Prescott Lakes area of Prescott. And my inclination is to just say to you, adopt Exhibit A, Option 1, petitioner version. My belief is that it implies certainly that existing uses are going to continue. And I agree with Councilmember Roosing that if you run into a speed bump, you can deal with it at that time. I also feel strongly that if any significant change occurs to city-owned open space, it needs to go to the voters. It's just that simple. As far as acquiring new properties, I think each one can be examined at that time, and changes or restrictions prior to purchase, prior to making it open space, can be accomplished then. And I think the mayor is right that there are so many potential additions out there that it would not be practical to draft an amendment today to accurately explain all of them, cover every possible speed bump that they might represent. And let me just step back for a second. My wife and I hike the Dells almost weekly. We've been around both of the upper and lower Goldwater Lakes. And a tip for you is if you have not been to the backside of Willow Lake Dam, Watson Lake Dam, you're missing something. The low water crossing's open today. It's going to stay open unless we have a really wet winter. It'll probably stay open through the monsoon season. Those places are absolutely magical. The other thing is the backside of Watson Lake can be gotten to even during wet periods by Granite Dells Road. There's a trail that leads off of that. And you can visit Watson Lake Dam. The last time we visited, it was spilling and the outlet works were flowing. Huge stream coming out. Amazing. So my view is that all existing properties need to be protected by providing for a public vote for significant changes. If I'm wrong that the petitioner version does not include allowance of existing uses, then that should be added, but I think it certainly implies that it is. Now, you know, I've appeared before the council a couple of times, and I hear a lot of issues with regard to staff not following, for instance, the Prescott Lakes Master Plan, the development agreement between Prescott Lakes. My sense is that the general public is not comfortable in allowing staff or future councils to deal with open space without a provision for a public vote. So I recommend Exhibit A, option 1, petitioner version, with a possible change to add existing uses to continue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Michael Byrd.
Mayor and Council, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and provide comments. We submitted a letter that I appreciate staff responding to very quickly. And the concerns that we expressed in our letter are not concerns with the overall approach to preserving open space and protecting it in perpetuity. Prescott Creeks is generally supportive of that concept. And I think the issues that we brought forward are specific to the longstanding partnership and relationship that Prescott Creeks and the city have, specifically at Watson Woods Riparian Preserve. We have a lease agreement there that dates back to 1995, and that lease is in its second term and goes through the year 2045. We are contemplating the need to revise that lease in conjunction with our in lieu fee mitigation program and the contemplated conservation easement project that Prescott Creeks and the staff have jointly invested thousands of hours of time over the last couple of years. And so I think our comments as related to both lease and conservation easement directly go to those two issues. To staff's credit and the petitioner's credit, both versions of the ballot language have accommodated the conservation easement language in, I think, great ways. So we don't have any concerns there any longer. With the lease, the language that was presented in the agenda packet, the lease is not part of the conservation easement. It's in conjunction, as we look forward into the future, it's in conjunction with the conservation easement that we would need to make those changes. And so I think with the language that we suggested as a possible fix for that, if that's acceptable to council and city council, then that seems like it could address the issue. And so we provided the same suggested language for the council version as well as the city staff version. And then I think the other, as we look at the purpose of open space as phrased in the petitioner language and the approved uses in the city language, nature preserves are included, which I think encompasses the Watson Woods Riparian Preserve, but we don't see any language specific to the in lieu fee mitigation program. And so we've included that as a suggested approved use. We did include mitigation banking and conservation banking just with the anticipation of those are similar tools that may come into play and be applicable for other city projects. So our comments were both focused on our existing situation at Watson Woods Riparian Preserve, but also with a mind of not limiting the tools in the toolbox, if you will, that council and staff have to manage open space. So I think we have a 30-year history of a lease being an effective strategy for council. In our letter, we stated that to date, we've brought in about $5.5 million that wouldn't have been possible without that lease agreement with the city. Those dollars went directly to improving city property. And with the in lieu fee program and with the lease looking into the future, we anticipate additional funds coming in to support restoration and planning and management of that property and potentially other properties. So we appreciate the changes and the response that council and staff have made, and can answer additional questions if council has those.
Do you have a question? No. Thank you, Mr. Bird.
Thank you.
Greg Murray.
Hi, my name is Greg Murray. I live at 5164 Porter Creek Drive in Prescott. Is that better? Thank you. Okay. I'm Greg Murray. I live at 5164 Porter Creek Drive. I want to thank everybody who has spoken today for pointing out the complexity of this issue that many of us might not see immediately. There's a lot of complexity here, and I really appreciate the fact that the city has to deal with all of that from the point of view of the petitioners to the to other people who have spoken. I guess I would advocate trying to keep the language as simple as possible, in the sense that it would sort of add to the or promote protecting natural open space for wildlife habitat and low impact passive sorts of recreation. As most people think of their use of open space, kiosks and additional sorts of active recreation features in the future probably wouldn't be as welcome as ones that are already there and that could be grandfathered in. We live in a increasingly crowded space, one that is becoming less and less recognizable to those who settled here for the friendliness to wildlife and to which their access to nature promotes their own personal health, their sense of community, and to a large extent, much of our economy. When open space is gone, it's gone forever. We've all observed that decision makers 100 years ago or 50 years ago or even 10 years ago would probably have made different decisions if they knew what we know now. And so I hope that as this process moves forward and comes before the voters, that we need to make decisions now that'll make those who come after us proud of what all of you did and what the voters do. Thank you.
Bruce McKeeman.
Mayor, council, staff, thank you for allowing me to have a brief moment to talk about this issue. My name is Bruce McKeeman. I'm a resident of Prescott and a member of the board of directors of Prescott Creeks and a former member of the Mayor's Open Space Advisory Committee. I endorse and support the letter sent by Prescott Creeks to the mayor and council on this issue. I also support open space and management of these spaces to protect their continual use and purpose as open space. The current proposal by both the city and petitioners focuses on methods of management instead of usage. There is nothing inherently wrong with leases or conservation easements, as they both can appropriately protect and maintain open space. The option of leasing does not need to be tied to a conservation easement to be effective and provide protection and preservation of the open space. The proposed amendment on the open space, on leasing for open space, does resolve that issue. The proposal should focus on uses, particularly adverse impacts or uses which denigrate or inappropriately affect the purpose of open space. I'm sure that we can all point to examples of inappropriate leases and uses of property that was not in keeping with good management and protection of the open space. But it is the inappropriate use, that is the issue, and not how you manage the designated space. Limiting management options unnecessarily limits your ability to properly protect and manage city property, while limiting unacceptable practices and uses provides for better protection and preservation of the open space. I support the intent of the charter amendment and request that you incorporate the suggested language from Prescott Creeks to avoid limiting proper management of open spaces. Thank you.
Dorothy Morris.
Thank you, Council and Mayor, for allowing me to speak this today. I'm with the Granite Dells Preservation Foundation. I really am concerned. We are a charter city. We are not a town with a council to make choices for the future for the entire community and its future. I've seen some choices since I've lived here almost 28 years where council made choices and now regret. I think this is a situation like we have in a U.S. Constitution with our founding fathers. We have a charter. A charter sets the boundaries, and then it's interpreted as the community grows and changes. Whether a restroom goes in a certain place on open space can be determined by a council, as was defined by Council Member Rusing. I think we're getting into something so complicated, unless we stick to the amendment that was suggested and discussed here today and push forward for an August vote, that it will become so complicated that the voters won't even begin to understand what's going on. Let's keep it simple and get it done. And thank you very much for your time.
Michael Parrish.
Well, Mr. Mayor and council members, my name is Mike Parrish. I'm a resident of Prescott. I really agree with what you just said and what Kathy Rusing said, council member. You got to keep this simple. I agree there's a lot of complexities to it, but the main issue is that 4 council members can have a vote and sell parcels of land that we own now or that we acquire in the future or piece it out. I really do believe that the community at large, who are the taxpayers who purchased this land, should have the opportunity to decide whether or not something should be sold off. The petitioners, Bonnie and Rod, I think with the city attorney have come up with some good amendments. I think they've come up with some good language that encompasses the properties we own now, properties we're going to own in the future, talking about recreational properties that aren't necessarily open space, talking about properties that we own that are outside of city limits, that we bought a parcel that would encompass that. A lot of those concerns have been brought forward. So we're talking about a referendum to the people. We got a lot of people here. I thought, I'm going out on a limb here, but could maybe by a show of hands, would people here who agree with the fact that the petitioners and what Council Member Rusing said and our city attorney, what they're presenting, would you agree that'd be the proper thing to send to the voters in August? Can I see a show of hands? I would say if this was sent to the voters as it stands right now, it would pass. I think you need to keep it simple, the language of the referendum, and then you can list all the properties. The major concern is once the properties are listed, you need to have a proofreader, get people involved, be sure all those documents are in there. But the language of the referendum will have general properties that we own. So, but the main thing is that the referendum goes through, is keep it simple and give it to the voters. I think that's very important. Thank you for your time.
Dan Pryak, I apologize.
Councilmember Rusing, did you have a question for Mr. Parrish?
Yes, I would just like to make the comment, thank you very much. And I just want to let everyone know that we just got an email from a well-known local developer who is against protecting open space from sale. And he doesn't want it to be decided by the voters. So there you go.
Can I, one more follow-on comment for what you said? You've seen me here with the no stickers. You know who I am. Sundog disconnect. Well, that's never going to go away. The Sundog connector, the developers will try and try and try again. Well, here we are. They will attack, and depending on the makeup of the council, they will try to get development done in these open spaces unless it's put into place by the voters that you can't do that unless we decide as the voters. You can't let the certain few the developers decide what's going to happen with property that was purchased with taxpayer money. That's one reason why I got involved in the Sundog disconnect. I mean, we're talking about the IGA making a regional park. Wouldn't it be crazy if all of a sudden a developer could turn a council to put the Sundog right through open space? Well, that could happen unless we nail this down. So I really thank you for your time, and I think that was a great question, a great comment. Thank you.
Dan, how do I say your last name, Dan?
Carefully. I get that a lot. It's a confusing 6 letters. I'm Dan Pridgick. I live in Yavapai Hills. I don't think I'm going to say anything new here, but I think the majority of people in Prescott live here in part, and probably a major portion of their decision to live here in part was due to the open space or the opportunities that the open space in the areas give to them. And everyone in the community receives both direct and indirect benefits because of this. And I think if you talk to the citizens, you'll find as much as people talk about Whiskey Row and Courthouse Square, they will also talk about open space areas around the city. And probably more of them would state that has a greater impact on them than Whiskey Row and Courthouse Square. And we know how we all feel about the legacy that those areas give to us. We need to recognize that open space in the area and the benefits it provides our community and the tourism industry that it drives for us provide us with a lot of benefits also. I hate to throw a comment in at the end. For existing uses, a statement such like maintenance and modernization of those facilities are allowed, but not footprint or utility expansion. I'm sorry, I'm big on contract language. If you can't tell from my history with the Sundog, sorry. But any removal of those legacy uses would revert the area back to the simple uses under the agreement here. And again, unintended consequences. I think we've seen with the Glassford Hill Regional Park what happened when a couple developers got in with some of the city council members and the mayor and decided to have this big theme and amusement park thing that basically had the community aghast at what they were trying to do with the park that the community at large wanted for passive recreational purposes. We want to make sure that doesn't happen, and we want to make sure this email that Ms. Rusing got doesn't sway future councils without having the public have a say in the matter with the benefits that the open space areas bring to the greater community. Thank you very much.
And Dan, I know you're referring to Prescott Valley.
Yes, did I not say that?
Right.
Sorry.
Just to be clear, okay.
Joe Trudeau.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. Pleasure to be here today. I'm sure you've heard enough of me over the years, enough from me, but I'm back. As you know, I am one of the co-founders of Save the Dells. What I'm going to say today does not represent Save the Dells anymore. I'm no longer involved, but I'd like to provide some historical perspective. Our first meeting was in 2016, so here we are about 9 years later, still talking about this stuff. And I commend Bonnie and Rod and Tom, Walt, Joanne, and others for continuing our work. The issues that we're discussing here are nothing new, and we actually have thought about this quite a lot over the years. I published a talk of the town on July 28th, 2020, and I want to read a little bit out of this. It's time to ask some serious questions. What lands could be acquired for the regional park and preserve? How do we acquire them in a fair and lawful manner? Would new bathrooms and trailheads be built? Can we provide and improve recreational access without compromising the privacy of existing homeowners? Where does the state, county, and city stand on providing amenities, services, and funding for land purchases? To answer these questions, our vision is a formal working group devoted to developing a plan in a transparent and equitable way. We invite the City of Prescott and Yavapai County to convene a regional park and preserve planning commission with members of public advocacy groups, governments, Native American tribes, academic institutions, Dells, landowners, and the general public. So we were thinking about this years ago, the question that you're facing of allowable uses. And it's challenging when we're talking about 20 or 30 properties. And therein lies the promise of the regional park concept. When we came up with the regional park concept, part of it was marketing. We needed to appeal to the public, throw something out there as a vision to work towards. The other part is when you're planning at a regional park level, you're thinking holistically and comprehensively about a number of properties. It's not really fair to the land to look at each property and its uses in a silo. So that's why we put this out there of the regional park and preserve. I will also note, and as a gentleman just before me said, Glassford Hill Regional Park, things have changed because in the beginning we were talking about regional park and preserve. The preserve part has kind of gone away. Too many syllables maybe. The reason we were promoting this, and this is in the newspaper and many meetings with council back then, regional park and preserve, is because in the city general plan, you have appropriate uses for parks and appropriate uses for natural open space, NOS. The general plan specifies, and I think staff is aware, that natural open space encompasses passive uses. And so you have inherently in the park and preserve a tension between park uses like playgrounds, amphitheaters, whatever, and natural uses. So it seems to me that the problem here is hinging on the allowable uses and the fact that you have a variety of properties, some of which the intent is park, the intent is natural open space, and it's getting lost in the weeds. It's getting too complicated, as a lot of people have said, and the gentleman a couple people ago who had us all raise our hands, it's clear that the voters
Time's up, Joe. Please
just
conclude.
want to see a simplified vote on something simple. Thank you for your time. Yep.
Joanne Oler. Tammy Lambert.
Good afternoon, Tammy Lambert, Butterfield Road, Prescott. And I came here originally because I've lived here since '68, and I would love to prevent another Hassayampa Lake catastrophe. And I would like to have a permanent plaque to that city council for selling our lake. But in regards to respect to Mr. Young and Mr. Barnes' point in the fact that version 2 of this could get so complicated, it could take years to really justify it, and we would still mess it up. So I'm in the keep it simple category. I could be misinterpreting this, but I think it was the second version that included utilities. Now, it didn't specify, did that mean city utilities or developmental private utilities? Like I said, there's a lot of details that I feel like we're not totally covered, and that's why it's way overdue. Since Acker and before, we have been fighting for our open space, and it should not be so easy for it to be sold off. Thank you.
Sue Knapp.
Hello, my name is Sue Knapp. I'm the Vice President of Prescott Alternative Transportation. We're part of the coalition that's working to prevent one of Prescott's open spaces, West Granite Creek Park, from being turned into a parking lot. West Granite Creek Park will be discussed at the Council study session next Tuesday, February 11th at 1 p.m. West Granite Creek Park should be the poster child for the need to protect all of Prescott's open spaces, not just from selling. That's not the issue with this park, but misuse of the city or by the city. This car-free park, as part of Prescott's Greenways Trail, has been protected as open space and by Resolution 3274 since 2000. More information is at prescottbikeped.com. Yet in 2021, the Parks Department removed its barriers to cars, cut down trees that community volunteers had planted, and dumped gravel over our restored soils to allow cars to park in West Granite Creek Park, all the while telling us that this parking was temporary. Last year, we finally realized the deception that we were up against when we were presented with the plan to turn our open space park into a permanent parking lot. Today, we are rattled once again by the blatant omission of West Granite Creek Park from the materials presented to you for discussion of permanent protection of Prescott open spaces. I have to apologize, I don't have long distance viewing, so did anyone see West Granite Creek Park on that second list that went up? Thank you. Okay. West Granite Creek Park, zoned NOS, as one of Prescott's open spaces, has been devastated by city staff who see no problem destroying it and simply omitting it from maps and discussion of open space protection. I look forward to our discussion of West Granite Creek Park at the next council meeting, February 11th, 1 p.m. As our coalition works to fill the void of protection for just one of Prescott's open spaces. Today, let's please ensure we take the most effective steps toward permanent protection of all of Prescott's open spaces before more city staff or others, developers, find ways to destroy them in the shadows created by this void of protection. And by the way, please add West Granite Creek Park and the Greenways Trail to the list of open spaces to be protected. Thank you.
Kathleen Murphy.
Councilman Moore, did you have a question for that last
Yes,
commenter?
I did. Pardon me. If I could just interrupt Kathleen for a minute. I had a discussion when we had our one-on-one council meetings last week to discuss the protection of open space, and I asked that very question about West Granite Creek Park, why it wasn't included. And I think it would be important for the public's information, Joe, if you would explain that it's, or the other Joe, that this is a city park and it's not zoned the same as open space as a city park.
It is zoned NOS, and from the beginning we've understood it to be open space.
Okay. It was explained to me in the meeting I had one-on-one with city staff last Thursday that the recreational use was a city park and not open space, which is different. So I just thought, I know that'll come up next week, but I don't want to confuse the two issues today. So.
Well, and just so that your comment doesn't confuse, the inclusion of West Granite Creek Park into that list, I'm sorry, but that's not the case. I just clicked on all those parcels 2 days ago. NOS, 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 all of them in West Granite Creek Park. So how that can be, and like I said, when those parcels, actually the soil remediation there that was understood when that was finished, that's an open space area. And the other parcels that we obtained for the greenways, those were all agreed to be transferred into NOS and open space. You can see the 2016 open space map. It all says open space. The current general plan draft, zoning map shows all of the greenways except for that little piece of the splash pad. There's now the proposal to change the splash pad to recreation. But all the others, including West Granite Creek Park on this side, on West Granite Creek Park, that we're talking about, this side of the creek, is the light green. And that is open space.
Thank you, Ms. Knapp.
We'll get into that more next week. I just wanted clarification on that. Thank you.
I'm glad to know there's that confusion going on as well. Thank you.
Kathleen.
Thank you, Mayor Good and Council. My name is Kathleen Murphy. I've lived here since 1971 when there were, I think, 14,000 people and 5 stoplights, and my kids and I all swam.
Ms. Murphy, can you speak into the...
Of course, sorry.
Because thousands of people watching online need to hear you.
I knew it. Thank you. Thank you, Phil. I wouldn't want them to miss a word. My children and I all swam and in Hacienda Lake, just a little aside. And during this period, I have watched a tremendous amount of incredible land being taken over by developers that should have been open space. And the reason at that time that was given was that we have enough open space, we don't need any more. That was not said by any member of this council, but of prior councils. They usually dredge us up when you want to hear about history, us old folks, so I'm going to give you 2 quotes. And one of them is Thumb Butte, this first quote, Thumb Butte Hill, Granite Dells Preserve, Badger P Mountain, and other planned acquisitions are Prescott jewels. They are one-of-a-kind settings. Nature has given them a unique design and carefully crafted them to give great joy to the city's citizens. The more the city grows, the greater the value their irreplaceable visual gems have. Once developed, they are gone forever. And that was in the newspaper back in the Daily Courier on April 28th, 2000, right before we passed the tax to support open lands. Open land, yes. The second one is a second quote, which occurred on May 1st, 2000 in the Courier, with voters, and you have to kind of be an old folk to remember this person's name, but with voters' concerns about hilltop preservation ringing in his ears, Sam Steiger posed a possible solution to the evening he won the mayor's race in September. Why not let the voters decide whether they want to pay more taxes to preserve some of Prescott's prominent hilltops? So a little history is always an important thing. And now we are asking the council to finish the work begun 25 years ago and allow the voters to decide if they want to preserve Prescott's open space in perpetuity. And we need to do this with this comprehensive charter amendment. It is critically important that this council include the additional properties that have been listed by City Attorney Joe Young. It is crucial that open space property acquired with taxpayers' money be protected by placing this new city version on the ballot in August. And I'm going to finish this simply by saying we need to really be careful we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Thank you.
Sanford Cohen.
Councilmember Rusing, did you have a question for Ms. Murphy?
Yes, she brought up history, and I would just like to update the history of the sale of Hacienda Lake. It was sold to a developer. I was up there recently, a couple of months ago, and it's now a fenced-off compound with a luxury home on the side of the edge of the lake.
So the kids can't go there and swim anymore,
No,
can they?
it's completely fenced off.
I didn't
no
think so.
trespassing. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council, and staff. I'm Sanford Cohen, owner and founder of Arizona's Hometown Radio Group, and we're headquartered at 3755 Caricio Lane in Prescott. I have probably spent more time on top of Glassford Hill than all the people in this room combined. We started out with our antenna site, the first solar-powered FM radio station in the country, built on top of Glassford Hill in June of 1986. The road that takes us up to the top of that site was created by the former mayor of Prescott, Rollie Simmons, who passed away recently. And so my concern for our radio station's integrity is the future use of Glassford Hill. Clearly, I'm not the kind of person that prefers to see buildings on every mountaintop, but I can tell you that this particular mountaintop, Glassford Hill, is very special to us for a couple of reasons. First, in 1988, when the Western power grid collapsed, the only available method of communication was our radio station with our solar-powered antenna site on Glassford Hill. Then, when the main trunk line was cut coming out of Phoenix towards Black Canyon City that severed all available communication services, including cellular and telephone, again, we were the only available method of communication. And so, as you go about crafting whatever legislation you end up with as a charter, I would ask you to bear in mind a couple of things that need to be addressed. Number one, even though our improvements on Glassford Hill, which are co-located with the town of Prescott Valley and with the Central Arizona Fire and Medical Authority, are all within the boundaries of the town of Prescott Valley, we nonetheless require a right-of-way on the road going up to that site that is in the jurisdiction of the city of Prescott. So that if there are opportunities to make allowances in whatever language you end up with to preserve right-of-way for utilities, telecommunications, and so forth, especially those that are pre-existing, we would certainly welcome that opportunity to have that language brought in. And if you need help to generate specifics on it, we're happy to do that. Last but not least, I know that there's a lot of emotion with regard to how the community values its open space. I just say that there are interests in health, public safety, and welfare with regard to telecommunications that supersede some of the cosmetic conditions that we may value. But as long as we are able to do this and strike a balance between giving the public the opportunity to communicate and be communicated with, then I think we can find a way to keep as much open space as possible and yet still be able to do so in safety. Thank you.
Thanks, Sanford.
Patricia Betteholt, I apologize if I mispronounced your last name.
Mayor,
Could I address?
Brucing, did you have a question for Mr. Cohen?
Yes, I would just like to address Mr. Sanford's concerns. He brings up some very good concerns. I would just ask the city attorney, because we do have language in here that mentions roads and paths for public safety access and utilities and utility installation and services, but this is actually not a government use. It's a private lease of state land where these utilities.
But it does allow for pre-existing roadways.
So it will be included.
And we are a licensee of the federal government.
Okay, there you go. Okay. So you're safe up there.
Yeah.
Okay.
FCC.
Patricia Betzel, currently living in Chino Valley, an active participant and community organizer for several grassroots groups throughout the valley. Thank you very much for the tip about PV. We have been actively working on reducing the Disneyland aspect of the PV side of Glassford Hill, and it's a good tip to know that they're going in another direction with the choo-choo train. So, want to thank or applaud Prescott and its citizens for being so actively involved in protecting their natural resources here. The beauty of this area is unrivaled, and I have traveled quite a bit, and I think I'm a fair judge of that. The council may be correct, or some of the council may be correct about being a little uncomfortable with what to do with our open space. It is a mind-boggling task. However, I think you can see by the fullness of this room that the public is not confused at all about what they want to do with that public space. And again, they are all a shining beacon to the rest of the Quad City area. We use these areas, and I include myself. I used to live right next to Iron King Trail. For passive recreation, we love them. We appreciate them, and we understand the rigor with which they need to be protected. We feel that the council should move forward with amending the charter. I do have to say that there's some interesting exclusions that may be looked into later through the public records request and discussed at a future council meeting. But I say, on behalf of the groups I represent, make this list complete, grandfather in the existing passive uses, no amphitheaters, please. Please define for all of us and the council the difference between a park versus open space. That is a little bit confusing, and sometimes we don't add the word park to some of the spaces, so I can see how that happens. It was talked about how much work it is to put this charter amendment together and the complexity of it, and I think everyone here can appreciate that. We've heard a lot of discussion on those complexities. But the work we're thinking about is how many times all of us will have to come back into this room to fight or explain or beg whenever we feel any of our natural open space throughout the valley is going to be threatened. That's a lot of work for us. There's a lot of people in this room. Some of us found out late in the game and rushed over here. And again, I appreciate everyone for doing that because it is a sacrifice on their part. Quite frankly, we are more afraid of the possibility that a majority on the council, this council and any council, could sell any of the open space, especially this open space that's been paid for by the taxpayers and valiantly defended, than we are of unintended consequences. I say put it to a vote and one and done. Thank you.
Councilman Montoya, did you have a question?
No, I'll wait. Thank you, Mayor.
Tony Hamer.
Mayor, Council, my name's Tony Hamer. I live on Downer Trail here in Prescott. I also run a radio show, Eye on Prescott, where we try to get the best information out to the public that we can. I found today's discussion extremely interesting, and I'm trying to look forward myself with a little bit of balance from a planning standpoint for the city. I want to take a high road here, not the lower road. And I'll refer to Joe Bain's comment earlier in the day. Who knows what that will look like in the future? And we're all speculating at this point. Here are a few reasons why citizens might argue against designating public open space in perpetuity. 1, evolving city needs and planning flexibility. Cities change priorities over time, and land that was once suitable for open space may be more needed for other purposes, such as schools, hospitals, or infrastructure needs for the city. It could conflict with other priorities as well. There may be competing needs for land in a city, such as affordable housing, which is what we're working on, and let's hope we can interface with that. Transportation infrastructure or commercial space. There's, of course, in any of these public open space issues, a benefit and a cost, and we've heard a lot about the benefits today. But there's costs as well. The city will have to put resources behind these open spaces which are preserved. Public spaces require ongoing maintenance, including landscaping, safety measures, and general upkeep. The underutilization of land. Over time, some public spaces may become underutilized or less relevant, and less relevant to people's needs at that point in time, and their preferences can change, and open space may not serve the same purpose as it once did. And none of us have the crystal ball to see that. There may be inequity in terms of preserving open spaces in parts of the city. There may be too much concentration of open land and disadvantaged parts of the city as well. In summary, public open spaces offer many benefits, and we all enjoy them. Not designating them in perpetuity would allow for more flexibility in terms of land use planning. It would make it easier to live in the city in many ways. And ensuring the land that can be adapted to meet evolving needs and priorities of the community. It will also allow for more strategic and efficient allocation of resources in response to changing circumstances which we can't predict. I'm a little bit surprised that this is the highest
Mr. Hamer, your
priority.
time's up. Please conclude.
Yes, I am moving right to that, sir. Highest priority that the council has for voters to consider in the charter. I have faith in the younger generations, the new generations who will get this parcel from you in terms of what's going on. This legacy that you leave should not be an anchor for future councils at all. And I do not support the charter amendment proposal as is because of the reasons I've stated. Thank you.
Tom Rusing.
Tom Rusing, 2194 Forest Mountain Road. I have a letter that I think was sent to all the council, and I was going to read from J.D. Greenberg, a prominent citizen, but also a member of the General Plan Committee. But prior to saying that, I would have to say that all of the previous speakers' concerns are addressed by the fact that this can be taken to the voters and let the voters decide. So I'm not sure any of them, and that's what democracy is about. So if the citizens have enough concern about the issues that he raised, then that can be taken to the voters and the voters can decide. So Mrs. Greenberg, or Ms. Greenberg wanted to be here but was unable to for health reasons, but here's her comments. However, based on my comments at the January 14th, 2025 meeting, I am sure you know I am in favor of protecting our open space in perpetuity under the city charter. Further, I believe citizens have the opportunity to vote on the matter. I support the revised wording of the city's proposal that was negotiated yesterday with petitioners Bonnie McMinn and Rod Moyer and the city attorney Joe Young. It allows for the protection of our important open spaces and recreational areas under the city charter. This cooperative effort deserves our recognition and thanks. Semantics are critically important. This was demonstrated by the ballot issues and subsequent council actions that arose years ago when citizens voted to tax themselves for roads and open space. That process created hard feelings and distrust, which have prevailed for decades. Those issues arose again more recently over the interpretation of the ballot 474 language. Trust is an important factor in reuniting various segments of our community. One council member stated that people do not trust its elected officials to do what is best under our representative democracy. Our community does not have trust issues. Our community does have trust issues based upon past council's actions. I assert that the City Council that established the protection of Watson and Willow Lakes and Acker Park under the City Charter trusted its Prescott citizens. They did not add verbiage to qualify that protection. They had faith that citizens would act on behalf of the community's welfare should that need arrive. I ask you now to restore that mutual faith. Please approve the newly revised language that includes the addition of the petitioner's recommendations to the city's proposal to safeguard our open space under the city charter. This current council has acted responsibly in other matters important in the community. I request that they do so again by allowing the measure to protect our beloved open space in perpetuity under the city charter to go forward to the voters to a vote of the people. Thank you, J.D. Greenberg.
That's all, Mayor.
Very good. Do we have any last comments from Councilmember Rusing?
Thank you very much. I think this has been a wonderful collaboration between council, legal, city staff, and our community. And I would just like to ask our legal department, Mr. Young, for some clarifications. You basically, we have a hybrid. You came up with the city staff's version, but with some changes, some modifications in the language, which I believe are up here on the board. Unfortunately, I found that the city staff's list of protected properties, there's 16 bullet points to be, that was their protected properties. And then we have on the second page, potential additional properties with little concern. I suggest that we add those, that's 6 more. And then additional potential properties may require additional research or consideration. I think we've addressed those concerns here today. And so that would be a total of 38. So I believe that if we pass anything, that hopefully you could make a motion to include all 3 pages of those properties, including there's another 10 more that the petitioners managed to find that's on this list here. So that's another 10.
If I may, I
So
think
we
those
had
are incorporated.
27 plus 10 is 38.
I think those are incorporated in the two other lists, not on the protected properties, but on these two lists. Those,
But
that
not the
list is
P-vine. The P-vine was omitted completely from all three pages.
Those on that list, the three P-vine properties are the same as the Watson Woods properties. Or correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe.
No, not Watson Woods. You mean Watson Lake?
No, what's the APN on those?
It's P-vine Trail, APN 105-07001B. And then 105-04-011A. Okay. And then the last one ends in a K. Okay, great.
Councilman Gambogi.
I almost forgot what I was going to say.
Councilwoman Furworth? Oh, never mind.
When open space was presented to the council, it was one of three proposals. One was about banning gasoline leaf blowers. The other one was about sustainability. And then the third was open space. And I agreed with what everybody wanted to do in all three of those proposals. However, I took issue with how you're going to do it. Banning gas blowers versus letting the marketplace do its business was an example of how I disagreed. In terms of sustainability, it's not just more EV charging stations or more solar panels or more windmills. It's having a prosperous community that's safe and healthy. Those three elements, by the way, come from the quadrant analysis in the recent city survey. When it comes to open space, I philosophically have an issue in two areas. One, I think at its core, it impugns the integrity of future councils. And secondly, we've heard the term democracy thrown around. This is not a democracy. This is a constitutional republic, and you have representative government. From a technical perspective, what I've heard here today, I could have played cliche bingo. You know, I heard terms like democracy or don't throw the baby out with the bathwater or unintended consequences or keep it simple. And it kind of reminds me of trying to build a plane while you're flying it. And I just don't think this is ready for prime time. Now, I think we have a case study that we can follow. Open space and the rodeo are both dog whistles. It sets Prescottonians against Prescottonians. In the meeting recently about the rodeo, thanks to the city manager, he's proposed a steering committee to address this issue. When I hear so many things like, I think it's this way, or this is included, it's not included, I'm suggesting that we create a strategic plan or incorporate it into the strategic plan and have a steering committee to iron this out. There is unintended, from what I've heard from this crowd, there is unintended consequences because everybody has an interpretation. And I think the risk is those interpretations could be wrong and it should be more finite. If you truly believe that we should protect open space, and I would wager everybody in this room, including myself, wants to protect open space. I don't think you're going about it in the correct way. If you take the partial deal that the city's offering you, you basically have protected the northeast corner of the Alamo, but Santa Ana is coming over the southwest corner of the Alamo. So you're protecting some open space, you're not protecting other open space. And that other open space could run the risk of being sold to a developer. I think you need a more robust plan that's more definitive.
Councilwoman Furworth.
Thank you, Mayor. I've been real quiet because I've been listening to everybody, and I've captured pages of notes. And where I'm netting out on this, there's a reason I got involved in politics back in 2018. And it wasn't because I wanted to get involved in politics. It was because I couldn't believe city leadership was not about to protect huge portions of hillsides around Watson Lake. And so I was like, well, what do we have to do to fix this? And I came to council and I asked individual council members, what are you going to do to lead on this? And I heard, we have a plan, we'll follow the plan, don't worry. And that made me super worried. So I got involved with people who were willing to say they took a stand on something. For me, we've heard it, again, other than 2 public comments, it has been absolutely unanimous from the far left of our political wing of our public to the far right of the political wing of our public. They want to protect open space, and they want the ability to do that from this council. So I'm all in on putting something before the voters. However, the logistics and supply chain woman in me comes out. And we've learned a lot just in a week or 2 of lots of discussions happening. And so I'm going to ask first to our city clerk, in order to make the August ballot, what is the last day we have to work the details of these 3 pages of protected properties?
Council would have to adopt language at the March 25th meeting in order for me to meet my deadline.
Fabulous. So I think that we need to get to a level of granularity so that there's no doubt in the future when citizens finally vote, is what they want to protect in or out? Do they understand exactly? And I'll be honest, reading all of your public comments for the last few weeks, the confusion between open space and parks is alive and well. And so I think we have to get crystal clear that we're working open spaces today. We might work parks in the future. We're probably going to work a lot of things if and when we finally get a general plan approved, because that's going to give us lots of work to do over the next few years. So to add another cliche into the mix, the voters, in my mind, in the last decade or more, have made amazing and right decisions. We promised in the 03, 15, and draft 25 general plans we were going to protect open space. The voters have been with us on the first 2 and probably will come along on the 3rd, depending on what this council does in the next few weeks. The voters did the right thing for the long-term health of the community and passed Prop 443 at their hardship. The voters did the right thing by a majority and passed Prop 478, and again, at their hardship. And so down the road, should the city find itself in a serious financial bind or unforeseen circumstances come up, and they will, I have absolute trust in the voters of this community that once again the public will make the right vote to save our fair city. So with that, I say let's do something today that gets us to a point that we're putting something clear on the August ballot, celebrate amazing thousands of acres of progress. And if we need more time to work the perfection, we have another ballot coming up. We'll do the right thing once again as a community. So I say go for it. Let's get 80 to 95% of this done and get it done to the voters in August.
Councilman Montoya.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be honest. I'm kind of in a similar boat as what Councilwoman Furworth was describing. The confusion around parks and open space is a big deal to me, and I think there are some people who think parks are open space, and there's some people who think certain parts of parks are open space, but other parts aren't. The other thing that I'm struggling with is I heard people who spoke very passionately in favor of the petitioner version, but then if I understand it correctly, the petitioners themselves are advocating for the staff recommended version. But they're advocating if we include certain parcels, and then some of those parcels have issues with them. There's uses that staff has recommended we leave in play. I'll be clear. I'm all in to do this too. I said to someone that a big part of why I got elected was because I was stated very clearly that I was engaged and committed to preserving open space. I think it's one of the things that makes Prescott such a wonderful and beautiful place to live, and it's why I plan on dying here. So I want to do this, but I think my concern at the moment, and I don't know how to resolve this today, is to get it to a place where I feel really good about it. And I'm a little haunted by 478 because I know we worked really, really hard on getting that right. And then we had to come back and fix it because people were confused. And even after fixing it, people still were confused. And I guess to me, if I had a magic wand, I'd want to take as much time as we can to get this right because I think it's such an important issue in this community. And I don't know I don't have a suggestion for how to resolve that today. I'm sorry, but that's my worry. So I wish I had something better and more clarifying to say than that.
Councilmember Rusing.
Thank you. I think we need to get this right. The clock is ticking, and I would like to see a clean version produced by our legal department because we did get some extra information today, and bring this back with a clean version to vote on. I don't want to wait till the last day, March 25th. Bring it back at the last meeting in February. I don't have my calendar with me here.
That's also the 25th. February 25th is our last
I
February
thought
meeting.
you said March 25th.
I did,
Okay.
but the meeting dates in March are the same as the meeting dates in February.
Okay, so February 25th, that would give us enough time to get the clean version done. We can review it, hopefully take a vote then.
Mayor Pro Tem Cantelmi.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm largely supportive of this, and I like the collaborative version. I have no problem with that, and I'm going to vote for it. This is another one of those subjects we have beat a dead horse. It is over and over and over again. What is it going to take to get this through? We have to do the right thing. And to address Mr. Gambogi, he doesn't want to impugn the integrity of the future councils. That is the whole point. We don't know what the future councils are going to do. We've already seen what's happened in the past. And I think right now we've got an opportune moment. We're 99% of the way there. I have absolutely no issue with passing this today, but I'll go ahead and wait. If we thought of something else, I didn't really see anything else there that wasn't covered, that we haven't already discussed. But we do need to do this. We need to address it now. And I think we just have a little bit left to do. Let's get it done and get it over with. We just cannot keep having these same topics come up year after year after year. It's time to move. Thank you.
Councilwoman Furworth, did you have another comment?
I did, thank you. Once we get this totally done and we all know what the list is, I think the charter's crystal clear right now to the voters that, they specifically name Acker Park, they name Watson Woods. So I do think naming and having that clear is important for the voters to understand exactly what they're voting for. Because if something is missing, because we're still working on it, then that could be another list that council and staff and the public work towards. But I would like to see that. And then the other one for me is, I'm going to, again, take our learnings from Prop 478, is then the working group, because I love Joe Trudeau's point about a working group. I do think it's worked very well in the last week, so let's just keep it going. I think there's some things with the ballot text that we have to get clear on and make sure that the voters understand what they're working on. And I don't know that right now when I look at this, that it's understandable to the voters. And and so that's a concern of mine. And then finally, for me, I know, Joe, you asked for us for some direction earlier when you opened the meeting. So there's a few things before we send people off to work on this that I do think some of these various versions or questions, you actually had some slides that weren't even in my packet, so I'm trying to catch up to you. But what else do you need that we need to do today to get to a final list?
I need to know what you want to do. So when it comes down to it, we're talking about properties and uses, and I've also heard a lot about simple versions. And to me, a simple version means we just put all of the property. We don't have to debate it, but we don't talk about the uses. We talk about not being able to sell or develop. And to me, that's the easy way to handle it, and we don't have all the questions, if that's what you want to do. But I need kind of, we've gone all over the place, and I'm just trying to figure out what the direction would be.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the difficulty here. I'd like to see it myself kept relatively simple, but also adding pre-existing uses to be clear on what could be maintained, renovated, possibly even expanded in those areas where we already have a recreational use that's pretty clearly identified. But considering the concerns of the council, being able to include a long list of actual parcels that are going to be included here seems to be an area that they would like some clarification. I hate to put you on the spot, Sarah. Do you recall how many people actually contributed to the community survey?
Oh gosh, I don't. I could look it up.
Yeah, I thought it was in the like 500 range. Okay.
I think Dylan's pulling it because I don't remember off the top of my head.
Now, when we have over 20,000 registered voters in this city, and we had several hundred people that took the time to participate in the community survey, drawing valid results from a small sample like that is somewhat questionable. I remember being involved in a very large community forum at CWAG when I first ran for council 8 years ago. And I asked for the people in that audience, and there was over 200 people. How many people have actually read the general plan? That's about the same. I think I saw maybe a dozen hands go up at that time. So referencing that the general plan recommends certain things, I find a little bit disingenuous because most people don't read it. The general plans have been approved by a majority consistently over the last multiple 10-year periods, but many people don't read it. So referencing that this item or that item was in the general plan, it was approved by the public, I find a little bit unacceptable to say that that should guide our future decisions.
Mayor, 770 people took that survey. Margin of error 3.5%.
Okay, well, that's great. That's 700 out of 22,000. So I take some of those recommendations with a certain grain of salt, and that's why I think a decision of this magnitude, for as long as this is going to affect open space parcels and development in the city for many, many, many years to come, has to be given really solid consideration to make sure that if we amend the charter to include this, it's well crafted, it's understood, and then the public can vote on it. I recognize we are a representative constitutional republic, and we're voted in here to represent the best interest of the people who vote for us. But when you have something of this magnitude, I think it does deserve a community vote to be put on the ballot. So I think at this point, you should have some direction of where we're going here. I mean, we've had a couple people say simple, a couple people say complex, some people say a hybrid in between. Do you have to cover all those bases? It's going to take a while to do that.
I guess I would ask, how important are the uses in the document? Because we can have an easy, flexible document that protects land by not going into uses, and that's the simple version. Are uses important to the council?
I think pre-existing uses are very important. Trying to analyze what future uses would be, and then we get into definitions. What's recreation? I mean, I think we all know it, but I hate to reference Thurgood Marshall, but being able to define it in a way that future councils would know where the border lines are would be a little bit difficult.
And the reason I ask is I think we can do a real simple version, and I don't want to speak to the petitioners, but I will tell you this is not what they asked for, and whether they would agree or not, I don't know. But we could do an easy version that lists all of city property, prohibits the sale, and then prohibits development for residential or commercial or industrial uses. And that type of thing would ensure that, the worst case scenario, the selling of Hasayampa Lake, for example, couldn't happen. And we could incorporate a lot of property. To me, that's the simple version. But I need to know how important uses are to council, whether it's worth it to bring that version to council.
Mm-hmm. Mayor?
Councilman Moore.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to state publicly that I support the intent of the citizens' petition to protect open space in perpetuity. As I read the three versions that we were given in our one-on-one meetings last week, there was the original petitioner's version, then there was a second draft, and then there was this final draft, which both Rod and Bonnie have referenced. I find there's a glaring challenge with it. I'm going to state, it says, notwithstanding any provision of this section, all existing city-owned open space property shall be retained as open space in perpetuity. But then there's a list. That's not all. So my feeling is we have incongruence in this final draft. We have a paragraph at the very beginning that says, all existing city-owned open space property shall be retained as open space in perpetuity. So my question is, why is there a list of properties when the first paragraph clearly states all? I think we should vote on this today as it is written. Thank you.
Councilmember Rusing.
Thank you. A lot of work went into the option 2 that has the 3 paragraphs, and the last paragraph defines pre-existing uses are included, and then also the following government uses. And to me, that clarifies what we need to be doing and prevents confusion. So I think we've done a lot of work on option 2 with those 3 paragraphs, and I would be fine if we just tack on a complete list naming what we've just discussed and with your modifications, and then get it on the voting agenda February 25th.
Mayor Pro Tem Cantelmi.
I would support that, Kathy. The other thing, going back to what Joe just said, if you add the whole crux of everything we're doing today is to make sure that open space is not developed. There's a term in the legal community. It's called leaving things up for interpretation. I am not for leaving this up for interpretation. It tends to get interpreted in a way that is contrary to what the intent is, as you know. And I think that everything you've listed there is everything we can foresee now. Can we anticipate everything in the future? No, we can't. But we're here today. As I said, we've talked this thing to death. So I'm in favor of not leaving the stuff up for interpretation, but I am in favor of adding exactly what you said. The property will be not sold or developed. End of story. That's the whole point. We want to save the property. So that's my vote. Thank you.
Councilman Montoya.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm I'm looking at my city charter on my phone right now, and I'm looking at the section that talks about the lakes that has been referenced a couple times, and I think was to a certain degree the nexus of this idea to a certain degree that those were the only open spaces that were specifically protected by the city charter. And, well, in Act 2, I'm sorry. Thank you. And I guess, I'm sympathetic to the idea of simplifying it and not defining uses, because I think somebody who commented, and maybe it was more than one somebody, said the idea that the city does have the ability to modify zoning overlay over time. And so that's one way to deal with it. But I wonder, I guess, if there's not a way to take some time to identify the properties that we want to preserve specifically, because I'm a little dizzy from which ones we're trying to do right now, because it's not entirely clear to me. But listing them in that existing section of the charter as like additional property, that seems as simple as it gets to me. But I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one who thinks that.
Councilwoman Furworth.
I like option 2 that came in our package, and it's because if we left it really simple, you can absolutely guarantee some future council is going to pave a roadway right through the Granite Dells Regional Park. So I like the fact that it gives, things such as, my big concern after everything that's happened in California is the ability of people, especially those of you in Yavapai Hills, to have a safe way to get the heck out of Dodge while the rest of us are jamming up every highway in this entire area. So I love the fact that we've given, open space the right to have emergency ingress or egress that's, not on paved roads, but on all-weather roads. And I think those are the smart things we've put in there. And the reason I like all of this, again, is because I've been reading all of your comments that have come in over the last few weeks. No bathrooms, people are so confused over what they want. And so I think it's important to have, until the day when they're there with their mother and the mother needs the bathroom and there's no bathroom, then they'll be like, oh, we should have had that use. So I do think that having this level of specificity, I get it's long, but I think it helps us all understand what we're voting for and what we're not voting for. And it keeps us as a community with options to keep this community safe and fire-wise. So that's where I'm netting. I'm sorry. I like a lot.
Phil?
Councilmember Rusing again.
Thank you. And I'd like to comment on paragraph 3 where it talks about uses. That's the paragraph that was crafted to allay any fears by the city staff. That was their input. They had questions. And so they had input, and that's why we have paragraph 3 that is more specific about the uses and to make sure that, the fire department and everyone else is okay with it. Is that what I understand, Joe?
Yes, that's accurate. I think it was just to give it was essentially what Council Member Fruworth said. So the people voting on it knew exactly what they were voting on. But it does complicate the document, certainly.
Councilman Gambogi.
Mr. Mayor, I think we're into the area of micromanaging, and I'm going to move that we postpone the decision on this meeting until the February 25th City Council meeting.
Okay, we have a motion on the table. Is there a second?
Can I amend the motion?
No. You could suggest an amendment if the original amender agrees with you.
May I suggest a amendment, Mr. Gambogi?
Let's hear it.
That we move this to the voting session on February 25th and give direction to the attorney to add his modifications that he just had up there on the screen and include a list of all the open space and Goldwater Lake recreational zone properties so that we can protect as much as we can.
I'm not sure he got all that, but even in spite of that, I'll accept it.
I did get it. Thank you.
Okay, then you have a motion, and I assume Councilmember Rusing, you're seconding the amended motion?
Yes.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. Councilwoman Furworth.
Thank you. So in between now and then, are we going to continue to have the petitioners and staff and the council have working time to get this to a point that on February 25th we're not swirling up here? We're ready to vote.
I would consider that a suggestion.
Yeah, I think that I know from my perspective, I'm going to redraft it based on what we've talked about, send it to council and petitioners, and get input.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Please vote.
Passes 6-1.
Very good. Thank you all for coming. It was a very scintillating and exciting meeting here. I know there's a lot of passion related to this subject, but we're going to do our best to get it as good as possible. And I do have some new batteries on order for my crystal ball. So thank you all for coming. This meeting is adjourned.